Congressman Adam Kinzinger and George Holden may have faith in those Syrian rebels, but there are plenty of American lawmakers who do not. Peter Welch of Vermont among them. He was one of 85 House Democrats who said no to funding the Syrian rebels. Here's why.
I do not believe that that plan has any reasonable prospect of success. It's extremely difficult to have any confidence that we'll be able to find, quote, moderate rebels who will be vetted, trained, equipped, and will that battle space and maintain a loyalty to us, as opposed to shift their loyalties opportunistically.
Congressman Welch joins me now from Hanover, New Hampshire. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with
Thank
me.
you.
Congressman, what do you make of sending those lawmakers to Turkey to meet with Syrian rebel commanders?
Well, members of Congress can't negotiate. Obviously, that's going to be the president. But I'd say two things. Number one, if the Syrian rebels get together and reach an agreement to work together, that's a positive and constructive thing. And by the way, that's much separate from the U.S. trying to train a proxy army. And that's what I voted against, because I am really skeptical of our ability to vet, to maintain their loyalty, and who do they work for. So the Syrians doing this, the various factions, that's a good thing. Congress trying to build an army. We have recent experience in Iraq where we spent $35 billion training the Iraqi army, and at the first smell of gunpowder, they took off the uniforms and fled. So there's not a lot of basis in experience in history to be optimistic about our ability to have a proxy force, particularly in a Syrian chaotic civil war.
Well, let's talk about what happened within Iraq today. There was a terrible incident where ISIS sent in military vehicles that they stole from the Iraqi army. Inside those military vehicles, they were packed with explosives. They went into the middle of this group of soldiers, and at least 300 of them were killed. Now, according to Colonel Francona, these Iraqi military men probably should have done some checks before allowing that convoy to come into their complex. It's just another example of how inept the Iraqi army is. Do you have any hope that Americans will be able to adequately train the Iraqi army to effectively fight ISIS?
Well, I'm a skeptic. Iraqis have to do this themselves. You know, our soldiers and our taxpayers left Iraq in pretty good shape, and they had to make a choice as to whether they wanted a civil society or a civil war, and they haven't held it together in order to build that civil society. But I think the real question here, it's chaos there. The real question for America is, what is the national security interest that we want to protect? And I think there's two things. One is we want to deny terrorists, wherever they are, a safe haven. And that can be done with counterterrorism activities, as the president is doing. Second, we want to do our level best to make certain none of the jihadists can come with passports to Europe or to the United States. And that's a homeland security challenge that's front and center on everybody's mind. But the idea that we're going to be able to micromanage the outcomes in that chaotic region, Libya, Egypt, and Saudi, pardon me, in these two countries, Iraq and Syria, we're not going to be able to micromanage that. We can be constructive and helpful when there is promising political developments and perhaps the judicious use of military power. But the bottom line here is our interests are denying the safe havens and denying access to our homeland.
Well, let me ask you this, and going back to the Iraqi army, Americans are trying to help them, you know, become adequately trained to effectively fight ISIS, but what they really need are commanders. They need someone to lead them, and they don't have that in the Iraqi army right now, because all those people already left. They split. They're joining the other side. So Colonel Francona, among others, believe there will be a need for American boots on the ground, as in commanders, to lead these Iraqi forces to make them this effective fighting machine.
Well, that's a dead-end approach. I'll tell you what, there's two reasons. They do need commanders. The reason they don't have them is Maliki replaced competent Sunni commanders with his cronies. So he doubled down on the sectarian division. But the second reason is that while obviously American commanders know how to command and do a great job, the American people are not going to support the introduction of more ground forces in that region of the world. And it's not just a question of being war-weary. It's a question of the American people coming to a sensible conclusion that the place is a mess and that the people there have to accept some responsibility for their own security future. So it won't work, and it won't have the support that the American people would have to provide in order for the U.S. to sustain any kind of extended ground operation in that region.
Yeah, but when you come right down to it, Congressman, you know, I hear what you're saying about them being responsible for their own safety, but our safety is at risk too because of them. We need them to get it together so we can be safe, and that's the biggest concern.
Well, that's exactly right. But let's define what it is we can realistically do. One, I think we can deny them safe havens. We don't want, you know, another a Taliban situation that we had in Afghanistan. But that can be through judicious strikes and counterterrorism activities. Second, we've got to protect the homeland. But then third, we can play a constructive role with our allies. And the President, I think, has been doing a good job building this coalition where we facilitate political developments on the ground that are ultimately essential. You know, Iraq is the key right now, because they have a moment where if they can diminish this Sunni-Shia sectarian divide, bring the Sunnis into the government, as General Petraeus did successfully during the surge. The Sunnis had a future. That's how they saw it, and they turned on al-Qaeda and successfully ran them out of Anbar province. That's essentially what we need the Sunnis to be doing, seeing that they have a stake in the future, to turn against. So we can play a role, but the primary responsibility for the civil society and the future of those countries has to come from those people.
Congressman Welch, thank you so much for your insight. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Still to come in the newsroom.